Hi, everybody, and welcome to the San Antonio Book Festival. My name is Erika Murray, and I am going to be your moderator for this session, Fire in Our Veins, The Myths That Make Us Who We Are, with authors Angeline Boulley and Jordan Ifueko. Before we get started, I just wanted to remember to let you guys know how you can purchase their books, The Firekeeper's Daughter and Raybearer. We hope you'll consider getting them from the Nowhere Bookshop, which is the Book Festival's bookseller. You can do so by clicking the Buy the Book button on the festival website. We know during this pandemic that independent booksellers have been hit pretty hard, so we want to support them, the festival, and our wonderful authors. Hey, also, if during the session you have any questions for our authors, you can click the Q&A tab at the top right hand of your screen, and you just type in your questions. We will leave the last 10 minutes or so of the session and get to as many of them as we can. All right, and now the reason we're all here to talk to these awesome writers. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they're going to tell us about their books. So Angeline Boulley is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. She's a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She's a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education, and she lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island. Firekeeper's Daughter is her debut novel, and it was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller. It's also the current YA book pick for Reese Witherspoon's book club. So, welcome, Angeline.
Oh, thank you, miigwech. It's good to be here.
Okay, and we also have Jordan Ifueko. She is the Nebula finalist and New York Times best-selling author of The Raybearer and other stories, including a short fiction in the Hugo-nominated magazine Strange Horizons. She's been featured on NPR Best Books, ALA Top 10, and other publications. She grew up under a blanket fort, eating fried plantains and reading comic books. She eventually switched those comics for a tea-stained notebook, and she writes about magic Black girls who aren't magic all the time. Jordan lives in Los Angeles with her husband, David, and their collection of Black Panther Funko Pops. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you so much. That was quite an intro for you to read. I should be shortening it.
It's all very awesome things. I know you shouldn't. Very informative stuff. So, first of all, congratulations to both of you on your debut novels. Can you each tell us, just give the audience kind of a synopsis of your book? Angeline, you want to go first?
Sure. So my book is Firekeeper's Daughter, and my 3-word pitch is Indigenous Nancy Drew. It's about an 18-year-old young woman who has an Ojibwe father and a non-native mom, and she's never felt like she quite fit in either at home or on the reservation. And after she witnesses a shocking murder, she reluctantly agrees to go undercover for the FBI to find out who's distributing a deadly drug that is hurting her community. And you know, it's a coming of age story. It's a crime, mystery, thriller. It's a lot of things. I really liked it when my publisher described it as genre defying, because I had such a hard time trying to figure out what lane I was in. But yeah, it's a novel that's based in my tribal community, although I fictionalized the tribe. And it tells what it's like to be a young woman, Ojibwe woman, growing up in contemporary America.
Yeah, and it does have so many things. It's hard to put it in one of the genre boxes. Okay, thank you. Jordan, can you tell everybody, tell us about Raybearer?
Yes, and real quick, I'll explain my eye patch. I'm recovering from eye surgery. I'm not a pirate, I promise. But you can tell me what you want. My debut novel, Raybearer, came out last year. It is the first in a duology. This is the advanced reader copy, the sequel that's coming out this summer, August 17th. Raybearer is the story of a magically hewn continent of 13 culturally distinct realms that are loosely based on real world cultures. The massive empire is ruled by an emperor who is rumored to be divine because for every person he anoints to his sacred council with which he rules the empire, he becomes immune to one kind of death until he is immune to all deaths except old age. The catch is that the people he anoints can still murder him. So he anoints one, becomes immune to drowning, but that person can still drown him, etc. So our protagonist is a young girl named Tarasai, who is sent to the capital by her mother to be a plant on the future emperor's council, because once she is anointed, she is to murder him. And it's a compulsion that she has despite what she feels, despite that this future emperor is one of her best friends and a good person, and she's a good person, she has to, and she doesn't know why. She is compelled by a mysterious woman who is her mother, but is known only as the Lady. And lots of adventure and soul seeking and coming of age ensues amidst, you know, Afroed fairies and lots of plantain and hair braiding parties and riding magical massive leopards across snowy terrains. I cover a lot. And in this one, I can't tell you much about without spoiling the first one, but she basically agrees to the underworld. Yes, she basically agrees to go to hell. Like a book full of like court intrigue and what have you, and assassination attempts. So that's the Raybearer series.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Redemptor, but I was like, I don't know what she can say without without spoiling things for those who haven't, read Raybearer yet. So awesome. Thank you guys for sharing with what your books are about. They're both amazing. So you guys definitely need to make sure you get copies of them. I wanted to ask you both, what was kind of your inspiration for writing these particular stories? Jordan, can you go first?
Sure. So there are lots of inspirations because this story I started in its earliest phases when I was 13 years old. I was in 10th grade. That's a long story in and of itself, but I was homeschooled up until that point. And then that year, I got to go to school for the first time. And it was this tiny school, tiny private school. My graduating class was only 17 people. And so we were this group of teenagers that just did everything together. And because it was a new experience for me, and it was also a very special group of teenagers, like we were just very tight knit and did everything together. And we took our education like really seriously. That's where this idea first came up for this group of teenagers who are being kind of groomed to rule an empire. And I use that kind of sinister phrase on purpose because one thing I learned growing up is how many ideas of imperialism and kind of divine / political right is infused into Western American education. And this school was no exception. In fact, maybe in a couple ways it did that worse, like many like kind of prep schools do. And so there was a lot of deconstruction that had to happen after I left, and mixing that with my love for the very genuinely loving friend group I had there. It kind of follows Tarasai's journey in like balancing like, well, I could challenge these things and risk losing everything that I've always wanted, which is like a found family, love, acceptance, I guess physical comfort, although she's mostly had that her whole life. She's pretty privileged from the beginning, and that's intentional. Or I could pretend none of it's there. Just to keep that stuff. So Yeah, there are lots of inspirations culturally too. My parents are Nigerian immigrants, so at the top of this empire, it's very inspired by the Yoruba people of West Africa, who reside mostly in what is now Nigeria. But yeah, that's the origins of Raybearer.
Wow, since you mentioned your high school class and being that close knit and thinking about the council, I'm like, oh, I can see that. Very cool, very cool. Angeline, what about you? What was your inspiration?
My inspiration, I loved mysteries and thrillers, but I was 18 before I read a book that featured a Native main character. And when my daughter was a preteen, I saw that she was struggling with some identity issues, the same as I had growing up. And when I was 18, something really bizarre had happened. Of a friend who went to a different school told me about a new guy that she thought was my type. It turned out that he didn't play sports and he hung out with the stoners, so he wasn't my type because I was a complete jock. And at the end of the school year, my friend said there had been a huge drug bust, and it turned out that the new guy had been an undercover narcotics officer trying to figure out who the suppliers were. And
What?
yes, and I remember thinking, like, what if we had been in the same school? What if we'd been in classes together and liked each other, you know? And then this little idea just stayed in my mind. I have a very overactive imagination. And it was, what if it wasn't that the new guy liked me, but that he needed my help? And then I thought, why would an undercover investigation need the help of an ordinary Ojibwe girl? And so that spark was there. And then when I saw my daughter and Native teens that I worked with on different tribal communities struggling with identity issues, I thought, I think that this is the same. I think this is the story. She's not just an ordinary Ojibwe girl. She's a girl that's struggling with her identity, and she gets pulled into this FBI investigation because, you know, and it was like, what is it about her? So really, that was, you know, my story is a very long time in coming. And so while a lot of things have gone quickly once I got an agent and the book sold at auction, it was a really long path up to that point.
Yeah, that is a great inspiration story. That's
I'm real quick. I just have to say, if you hear any groans, I think my dog has gone into REM sleep, so he's like chasing something. That's my dog. It's not me. In his dream, and he's like,
they dream and their little paws like twitch and everything. Yeah,
but any little groans, I promise they're not me. Real quick,
no worries.
Yeah, I just want to say, Angeline, the way I expected that story to end, and I'm sure you've experienced that before, is like whenever some random friend is like, hey, I know a guy that's your type. You know, at least for me, when my non-Black friend said that, they just meant they knew a Black guy that didn't steal. Like, that's the idea of my type is like, hey, this is a Black person who's not a criminal, the way I kind of expect Black people to be. So I thought, yeah, your type, he was just Indigenous. But I was like, oh, wow, that's so much more there. But I'm glad you got a novel out of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And I had never met that guy. I never met him. I don't know who he is. He's out there. And then one of my friends was like, you need to go find him. And I thought, nah, the story is what I wrote, not, you know.
Yeah, that was the important part.
Yeah, I got what I needed out of that situation, so I'm good.
Right. That's so funny. So both of you kind of touched on this, and with your characters, your Donis and Tarasai are both really dealing with identity issues. Both of them are more obviously in the Firekeeper's Daughter. So Donis is mixed, right? She's half Ojibwe and half white.
I like to say that she's an Ojibwe girl with an Ojibwe dad and a non-native mom, because I think the whole like fractioning of identity is something that is like a colonizer concept. It feeds into like the whole blood quantum stuff. So she is Ojibwe, and so yeah, that's how I describe her, as an Ojibwe girl that's biracial.
Right. And she struggles with that because she, in a sense, she doesn't know where she fits in. Is she, because each of the different communities, the Ojibwe community, some of them are like, well, you're not completely Ojibwe. And so she kind of grapples with that identity of herself. And Jordan, Tarasai does as well, because she's half Eru and half, what's the other half is?
Human. It's interesting because Tarasai's half Eru identity, for those in the audience who haven't read Raybearer, Tarasai is the result of a union between her mother and this world's equivalent of a djinn. So like an entrapped guardian spirit that has to grant you 3 wishes. And one of the wishes that her mother demanded was that this creature father her child, so that the 3rd wish would be inside her child, and she could command her child to do absolutely anything at least once. And that command is, hey, go murder your first friend. Lovely woman. But I purposely underplayed the amount that her Eru half kind of informed her identity, because one of the most major conflicts from this book is actually how she is made in the image of her mother, of her human ancestor, and how that ends up being way more harrowing the more she learns about her mother. That's on purpose. I feel like a lot of our greatest fears, especially as developing young adults, doesn't come from, this other necessarily like otherworldly thing. It comes from the familiar and what we're afraid of. Am I going to be just like my parents? Am I going to be abusive emotionally or physically the same way they are? Am I going to have the same kind of mental illness that they have, or the same latent bigotry that they have? And how can I oust that in myself? And so the way that Tarasai approaches that, she approaches it 3 ways. The last one is the one that's the most healthy. The first is complete and utter denial. Like, hey, I'm my own person. I don't have to be my parents. I'm absolutely nothing like her, even though like genetically I was made kind of to be a clone of her. And also, I was raised under her influence and with the same, just no. And so when that doesn't work, when parts of that influence come out, then she goes the other extreme and it's just like, I have no agency. I am doomed to be just like her. I don't deserve any of the love that I have. No one should trust me. And then she has to come to that equilibrium of accepting her agency, but also not ignoring the demons that do make up her past and will come out and influence her future if she isn't very intentional about, taking power over that and watching out for it. I forgot the question, but I hope that answered.
No, you did. You're good. Okay, so I believe it was Angeline that mentioned that you said you were 18 years old before the first time you saw an Indigenous character in a book. What was that book, and what was that experience like for you? Because I know, part of the I guess blurb for this session talks about the whole we need diverse books push, which has been long needed for a very, very long time, so that people in marginalized communities or backgrounds can see representation in books and other places too. But what was that before that point? Were you a reader? And when you did read that book, like what was that like for you?
So the book was Stranger with My Face, and I read it. I was a senior in 1982, 83, and I was excited that it was a character who was native but had been adopted out. But the story was problematic, and it was written by a non-native author who I love, Lois Duncan. I love so many of her stories, but on this one, I remember coming away feeling disappointed somehow, and I couldn't really figure out why. And it was because it played into some stereotypes about the beautiful Indian maiden who's the daughter of a chief and falls in love with this white guy and has these twin baby girls
Yeah.
who end up getting adopted out, and different different families. And there was some, and that part of it just felt hokey to me, I guess is the word I would use. It felt like those easy stereotypes. And so it was kind of a letdown. It was like, I've been waiting for a book with a native character, and then, it was problematic, but I couldn't vocalize why it was until much later, when I realized the importance of own voices, and writing a story featuring an indigenous character, or set in a tribal community, and having it from a person from that community, that it would capture, that's what my goal was to capture the nuances and the beauty and the joy, as well as the unvarnished truths, because I feel like when someone who's not from my community tries to write about it, they miss things. They miss certain things, and it ends up being a two-dimensional portrayal of my community that doesn't serve my community well.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's well, and that's sad that I mean, it's good that you got that in a way you got that representation, but it wasn't, I guess, authentic. And so is after that point, did you ever, obviously you wrote your own so that you could have, so that there would be a book out there. But before your own, did you ever come across another book that you felt did your community justice?
Louise Erdrich, I felt, was someone who represented Ojibwe Chippewa communities the way that we are. But when the Children's Cooperative, there's something out of University of Wisconsin-Madison that tracks literature for children and teens, and they keep track of the number of books published in the US per year that are about a Native character and that are by a Native character. And when they first started doing these statistics in 2002, it was 10 times more likely that a book about Native characters was published by a non-Native author rather than by a Native author writing about their community. And, thankfully, the data is much better now. But, there were a lot of people who were telling stories that they weren't writing about their lived experience, and they were continuing some harmful stereotypes, harmful and inaccurate stereotypes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were in the game now and able to put your work out there. Jordan, first of all, what did you read as a kid, teen growing up, and do you remember the first time that you kind of felt truly represented in a story, in a book?
You know what? I was so used to only having like little windows of myself represented that I found like a lot of deep satisfaction in those windows. I learned early to be content with those small bits. I didn't realize this until I was much older, but I never really actually expected to find a character that I was like, wow, this is just me on every level, because, you know, when you come from a minority, you just kind of learn to temper your own expectations without realizing you're doing it. Having said that, the windows that I did get were very special to me and continue to be. I really loved the Addie Walker books from the American Girl series. It's weird because that's like this huge lucrative franchise, right? Meant to sell dolls. But the author that they got for Addie, the Black American Girl, the only one when I was growing up, and I think they discontinued her. You know, that's but it was written by a Black author, which was in and of itself rare. You know, a lot of books about Black children were still written by white authors. And she was an escaped slave, but they made a point of that only being like the very beginning of this story. And then the rest of it was just her living with her family, her free family in Philadelphia. And Addie was smart, like she, you know, even learning to read, you know, I remember this very distinct scene of her like teaching her mother how to read with like making dough shapes out of letters, and her mom was making meat pies, which were my favorite food. It's a very common Nigerian immigrant food. It's like a mix of West African and like British colonial influences. I felt really seen by those. She had an older brother and a little sister like I do. You know, both of her parents were present, even though they had to fight all of the difficulties of being escaped slaves in order to be together and find each other. And it was just this loving, intelligent family. And their clothes were pretty, like, you know, even though they, you know, because they were only slaves for the very first part. The rest of it was just like these really beautiful, you know, 19th century dresses. And whenever I could get a new one for my Addie doll, I just loved it. It was really, really special to me. But as I got older, so that was probably my best shot at representation as a younger kid, I really started to identify more with like the young woman I was becoming. I was in a very conservative, fundamentalist religious community, and there were lots and lots of there was pressure for a lot of really specific gender roles, right? I first read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte when I was 11. And while that book definitely has problems of its own, one thing I still love it for is how loudly she just champions her own agency the entire time. Charlotte Bronte was like this 5'1" grumpy young woman from Yorkshire, born to a patriarchal, you know, father who just like kind of yelled her right to exist and have her own mind and get to do her own thing for her whole life. And Jane Eyre is a big part of that. Jane Eyre made me a feminist before I knew what it was, before I knew that wasn't a dirty word. That was big influence. And lastly, I think the author that I credit most with my drive to write is Gail Carson Levine, who wrote Two Princesses of Bamar, Ella Enchanted. She just writes all of these really beautiful middle grade fantasy books that celebrate all kinds of girls. Two Princesses of Bamar is special for me because it sets up the usual strong female character protagonists. Like, it's about these two sisters. One is Meryl, who's like I don't like dresses and I'm not good at feminine things. I'm just gonna get on a horse with my sword and go on a quest. And then there's Addie, who's, you know, meek and gentle, and actually like her biggest talent is embroidery. And she's afraid of a lot of stuff. And Meryl is the one who gets sick. Like, that's the one thing she can't defeat with her bravado is just illness. And so Addie has to go on this epic quest to find a cure for her. And she learns bravery without becoming a different person. Like, Gail Carson Levine always celebrates all kinds of ways of being a girl. So Meryl is still a hero and awesome. Addie is still a hero and awesome. And Meryl defeats things with a sword and Addie defeats things with embroidery. And yeah, that has a big impact on me to this day. because yeah, I feel like, you know, I've experienced both sides of the spectrum, like the conservative
Right.
environment that only thought the meek, gentle version was the acceptable way of being a girl, and the kind of swing we had in kind of the mid 2000s with well-meant girl power narratives that ended up just being like really misogynist towards anything girly. Like if you're a
Yeah.
strong girl, you hate pink, and
Yeah.
you're not like other girls, and all this like really unhealthy, awful stuff that denigrates
Yeah.
what it is to be feminine, if that's what you want to be, you know. So that's one thing I love about YA. I feel like there's so much room for all sorts of girls, especially within fantasy.
Right. Well, that actually brings up, so I was going to ask later on, but since you just brought it up right now, specifically writing for young adults, like why did you choose this kind of area instead of writing, say, an adult fantasy or an adult thriller? Why specifically did you want your books, your message to go to young people?
For me, it was, is my story at its core, is it a thriller or is it a coming of age story? And it has so many layers that I had to be honest that it's a coming of age story dressed up as a thriller.
Mm.
So I think maybe if it had been purely thriller, I would have more strongly considered publishing in the adult market. But because at its core, it was Donis's search for her identity, her claiming of her self, all of the parts of her that make her her. That's very much young adult, and so that's why I did choose to publish in that arena.
For me, it was that, I guess that's what felt closest to me, because I started Raybearer when I was 13, but I'd been writing since I was very small. My earliest memory with my baby sister, who's 9 years younger, is me like writing out this like story for her with like clip art on Word and like printing it out and stapling it together and putting it like gently in her crib, like, this is for you.
Aw, that's adorable.
Well, she's 18 now, right? So I have this built-in beta reader, and I just feel like she's been my beta reader from the very beginning. But yeah, I think having been a writer as a child, that young adult fiction felt like, yeah, it just felt closer to me. So that's what I aspired for as I became to be a teenager. I also really liked reading young adult fiction, but to be honest, I was big on dead people books for a lot of my teenage years. Yeah, I read a lot of the Brontes, especially the Bronte sisters. I think there is a theme of hope and redemption in YA that is not really guaranteed to be found in any other genre. Adult fiction can be redemption filled, but it's also an acceptable conclusion in adult fiction for, you know, the conclusion to be that, you know, everyone sucks and life sucks, and, you know, you are always going to be trapped in this ennui and no one will really understand you. And that's a valid thing to express. Like, most feelings are valid things to express, but that's not what I usually come to a book for. And so I wanted to write what I come to a book for, which is generally a sense of either feeling like parts of my context are being put into words that I couldn't quite grasp at myself, and feeling validated and understood by that, or by learning that same experience about someone else, you know, who is different than me. And again, I think YA tends to be ahead of schedule versus other genres when it comes to representation like that. I think YA gets a lot of rap for being like too woke and things like that, but I think all that means is like it's generally a few steps ahead of what will then become, you know, like somewhat standard in other genres. And I don't know, I just feel like YA is the test guinea pig. A lot of what works and what doesn't, and what's too much and what's too little, you know. I think I also just really admire teenagers as I don't know, I feel like when I was a teenager, my emotions were very pure. And by that, I don't mean like morally, I just mean that I felt them without even knowing how to temper them, or even a need or a will to temper them. So if I loved something, I really, really loved it. Like I would die for that thing. And
everything was in extremes,
Yeah. And honestly, while that comes with challenges of its own, I do think that as adults, it's also unhealthy when we learn that it's not cool or it's not mature to love something that passionately or that purely. You know, like that is a, I don't know. I feel like enthusiasm is something that we equate with immaturity, and that's not right either. You know? And so I just really like, I don't think I could ever fall in love with a book the way I could when I was a teenager. And I think that's a loss. I'm glad that I have like way more experience of the world and lots of other relationships to pour myself into. I know that part of that enthusiasm was being lonely as a teenager and I could just like find my whole identity in. But I also think that beautiful things are worthy of love like that. And like that we're missing out on so much by not letting our hearts love things that we find beautiful like that. So all that to say is I think that there's something really awesome about teenage fandoms, and I love even the opportunity to write a story that could be that book for a teenager, even if it's just for that little phase of life. Because I have my copies of my favorite books that are just like literally falling apart, like the book glue is, because I loved them that much and I took them everywhere. So, a long rambling answer.
I loved the book too, but I wasn't reading the Bronte sisters. I was reading V.C. Andrews.
All right, yes!
I was like, you know, my mother one time told me about a book that she read, and when she got done reading it, she tore out every page of that book because she was so aghast at what that book said. And I went to the library and found that book, and like you know, my greatest goal is to be on some banned list, because those are the books that I read when I was a teen. If I wasn't supposed to read something, you know, I've never read Watership Down to this day. Like I faked it for my high school, you know, essay, because I was busy reading V.C. Andrews and things that were like really captured my attention. So yeah, I feel like I'm the anti-Bronte.
That's so funny. Yes, flowers in the attic and
and oh my God, yes.
Yeah. But also I think when I was a teen, YA was not really a genre. Like what it is today, like that didn't exist. I mean, there was like, I remember the Babysitters Club, but that was like younger and like
Judy Blume. It was like, where do you all the Bloom stories?
Right. Yeah, it was that, and then it was adult. Or classics, right? Yeah. So that's too funny. Okay, so I want to talk about the culture aspect in both of your novels. So Angeline, you put so much, like I just felt when I was reading Firekeeper's Daughter that like I was just immersed in the community, and you did a really good job of explaining the inner workings of like reservation life and just like the community, and it was just and it was something that I had never read about before, to be honest. And so I appreciated all that because I if it hadn't been explained so well, I would have been lost. You know, I would have been like, I don't really understand the connections here. So this is, you're writing what you know. And it seems like you're aware that a lot of people are not going to know the inner working. So it feels like you made a very conscious, you know, effort and decision to explain those things. And I just want to kind of hear about your process in doing that, and what did you like things did you decide to spend more attention to explaining and that kind of thing?
Well, and that's a great question. Nuts and bolts answer wise, the structure of the story, I felt like having Jamie be the new guy in town, being this outsider, and Donis ended up, he's a hockey player, and so she gets assigned to be or volunteered to be his ambassador. So she gets to tell him things about the town and the tribe. And so that was my way of knowing that there were going to be readers who have never stepped foot on an Indian reservation or been to a powwow, but that was my way of how I could bring people up to speed. Is this the part where I can talk about like the hero's journey and how I kind of
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Talk about whatever you want.
Okay, if I can do this screen, I'm hoping this works. Oh, okay. So we are going to go. It's showing part of my screen, but not all of my screen.
I don't see your screen.
I don't see it either.
Okay, then I'm going to cancel that and we will do something else. So when I was working on my story, I started studying like the hero's journey, and then I thought, so the monomyth, that a lot of cultures have this similar adventure story of this hero leaving the known world, answering this call to adventure or a quest, and entering an unknown world and having a wise mentor and having trials and tribulations, finding the secret elixir or whatever their quest is. And then when they return to the new world, they are a changed person, but they're able to navigate because, and I thought, we have our hero stories. I mean, in Ojibwe teachings, we have this character called Nana Bush, and he's kind of a goofball. And it's like whatever he encounters, it's like, well, that's why Beaver builds his houses, in the river. And this is why Rabbit got its ears. And, it's like this character that sometimes he's the butt of the joke, and he discovers all of these things, but each of those stories is a teaching. And I thought, we have our hero's journey. And then I thought, what if I told the hero's journey from an Indigenous young woman's point of view? And my eureka moment was, I saw a graphic of the hero's journey in a circle, and so it showed the character's journey. Well, then right after that, I looked at something that's called our medicine wheel. So it was, a circle within 4 sections, and it went through like, our eastern, southern, western, and northern directions, our 4 sacred medicines, our different traditional colors. And I thought, what if this Indigenous character who's going through the hero's journey, what if her journey follows our medicine wheel teachings? And so, typically a story follows the 3-act structure, but in Ojibwe culture, 4 is a really powerful number, the 4 directions, and the 4 medicines. And so that was how I structured the story, to tell an Indigenous story. And so, yeah, that's what I did.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. And Jordan, what aspects of your book actually has, I feel like there is lots of different cultures kind of represented. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's also intentional. So one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to ever find a story that I feel makes me feel just 100% represented is that children of immigrants have all of these mini cultures of their own, depending on when their parents came to the state where they are or the place where they are, depending on how much their parents wanted to share their culture, depending on what specific place they immigrated to. So like someone whose Nigerian parents immigrated to downtown Houston in a metropolis that not only has loads and loads of Nigerian immigrants, but also a specific culture of Black Americans is different from someone whose parents, you know, a lot of Nigerian immigrants, they're engineers and stuff, so they'll go to places that are near like industrial tech hubs that are like very suburban, very white. The latter was my case. But then it's even more complicated because my mom is half Black American and half Yoruba. Her dad came to the United States for university, met my grandmother, who is Black American, like from a poor Black American Southern family, and they all moved back to Nigeria where my mom grew up. So it's all of these like really weird intersections of culture, complicated additionally by the fact that Nigeria was a British colony until the 1960s. So my dad grew up partially in a British colony. And that affected their education and even their food and the media they watched. So it's just this like, Raybearer is the sum of all of my cultural influences. I have never felt, I've obviously never felt like white enough for the white communities that I grew up adjacent to, never Black American enough, never Nigerian enough, never anything enough except for all of these lenses through which I just naturally saw the world, this weird kaleidoscope. So my parents were very good oral storytellers because that's really big within West African culture. So I had that sense specifically of Yoruba storytelling, where if you tell a story, there's lots of sound effects. And, you know, if you're going really West African with it, then people will be encouraged to say the sound effects with you because they know it's coming up. So you'll have someone try and do something multiple times usually. So like, you know, the turtle, you know, couldn't get across the lake. So, you know, he backed up and he tried again and he wobbled over to the lake. And then you go like, kedu, 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 kedu. And it just worked. And we tried again, you know, that kind of thing. Where stories are meant to be group activities, they're supposed to be oral. You're supposed to know your part. And that combined with a lot of different, I don't know, like with Western fairy tales, there is often a moral element that isn't there for a lot of West African, and I've also noticed like indigenous folk tales, which are more like about how things came to be rather than how things should be. You know, this kind of prescriptive moralism that comes with a lot of more Western stories. So that was an interesting intersection because my parents were, and still are, very religious, you know, belong to the conservative evangelical Christian sect. Christianity and Islam is very, very big in Nigeria. As well as the indigenous religions, which kind of influence things. You know, they end up doing a mishmash of all of it. Yeah. So Raybearer, all that to say, unpacks all of these different cultures, some more explicitly, like there are griots within the world of Raybearer, which are real. Griots are West African. They're like a mix of historians, musicians, and storytellers. And because West African society tended to prefer oral forms of records, they had written forms, but they preferred oral forms. So the griot was very important because they would memorize all of the histories and stories of a region. And then they would pass those down to the next griot, who would not only have to know all of those by memory, but make up new ones for whatever else was happening. And so it was just this massive amount of information you had to have committed to memory, as well as being a musician, as well as being a bit of a politician, because griots often like worked for the Oba, which was the equivalent of a king in many regions of West Africa. And a griot was situated in a way to, you know, tell the Oba he was about to do something stupid that other people weren't. So the griot would up and be like, oh, Oba, there used to be someone just like you, and he did the thing you're about to do, and this is why it didn't work out for him. You know. So yeah, I had a lot of fun putting the elements into Raybearer, but I also had a lot of fun having the freedom to represent all parts of myself in this book. Just bits from all of these different cultures and their value systems and their religious systems as well.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so we are actually, I feel like this time has gone by really fast. We're already 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna take some of our audience questions, but I'm not done yet. But okay, we'll see. We'll see how much time we have left after audience questions. So let's see. Carly is wondering how much research Angeline had to do since Donis, the protagonist, seems to know so much about biology and anatomy, because she's very, very extremely smart, very sciencey. And Angeline mentioned in the chat that her internet search history is scary. How so?
Well, my most interesting research anecdote is that I learned how to make meth from the state police, and I was able to attend a workshop that the state police were putting on for police officers, and I was the only non-law enforcement person there, about how to make meth, different methods, and how to identify clandestine meth labs. And then I have since done a lot of internet research about meth, and there's a lot that's out there on the internet. So yeah, my internet is scary. Surprisingly, I am not good in science and math, and I've never played hockey. So as a writer, I just did a lot of research, and then I had beta readers who, you know, I might have only shared one chapter with them, but it was, you know, my friend Stephanie, who has played on leagues, you know, her whole hockey leagues, her whole life. And I was like, can you read this chapter? Because there's, you know, hockey going on, and I want to make sure that I'm not, you know, and then my son played hockey. And so I'd be like, what's it called when you do this? And yeah, he's also my subject matter expert on shenanigans, because he all the things they get into. One time, I'm typing away in the family room. We had the family computer. So I'm typing away on there, and my son is over with his friends, and they were like 14, 15. And all of a sudden I hear one of them go, ow, ow. And I looked, and they were like poking one of the boys with something. And I said, what is that? And it was a disposable camera that they had redone the wiring for it to be a taser, a low-level taser.
What?
And I said, what in the hell are you boys doing? And I had learned on the internet how to do a homemade taser. And
my gosh.
You know, I took it from them, and I took it to the tribal chief of police, and I was like, this is what my son and his friends were messing around with. And, you know, and the chief of police is like, well, you know, there's a lot on the internet. And it just, yeah. So I drew from a lot of my kids' experiences, and then I always worked in tribal communities, and I would just bond with kids, you know, teens, and you know, so that's, yeah. Research was a big part of it, but my research maybe was different from other people's research processes.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so Carly also wants to know, Jordan, how much research did you need to do into African legends, culture, and history? And she loves how rich this aspect of your book is.
I did have to do quite a bit of research. Again, being a third culture kid means that there's a lot that you didn't get to pick up organically through osmosis. My relatives were all very, very helpful with that. Though I did have to do a lot of research on my own, just because Raybearer doesn't take place within a colonized West Africa. It doesn't take place within West Africa at all, but the the culture is coded to be pre-colonial Yoruba. And to find sources on what it was like in West Africa before colonizers came is very, very difficult, in part because the way West Africans preferred to code information was through people. So, you know, they didn't anticipate like, oh, we'll need to like make a library full of stuff. It's just like, no, just, you know, ask your village people, like they will have known the stories that they memorized, you know. But also because a lot of that information was destroyed or ignored by colonizers. And so I'd look up these articles by Europeans describing what they saw before West Africa was colonized. And they'd be describing these amazingly intricate societies and then coming to really racist conclusions that didn't make any sense. So like one memorable one is a guy who described a system in which a bunch of different regions within, I think, the Yoruba Empire came to a decision, which basically boiled down to each of these villages had representatives that they'd send to one place, and the representatives would say what their region wanted, and whoever had the most votes, essentially, that's what would be done. It was democracy. That's plain and simple, and it was beautiful, and it was well done. And the most that this researcher could say after describing this process is like, it is fascinating how there seems to be maybe like a primitive sort of democracy. I remember that phrase in particular. And I'm just like, what about this is primitive? Like you guys aren't out there yet. You guys still have a monarch that calls the shots. Yeah. Just admit that these people got to democracy before you did.
Right.
You know? And so it's stuff like that that was really infuriating and frustrating, especially when you see the effects of colonial influences still in West Africa today. Like the concept of an Oba is way closer now to a European concept of a king than it would have been before colonialization, and that's frustrating. But all that to say, the research was still fun. Like, it was frustrating, but it was really cool whenever you'd come upon something that you're just like, oh, this is so beautiful. I have to find a spot for this in the book. Like this particular game that children's play, or this thing that storytellers do. Like one thing that shows up in Redemptor is before a specific person tells a story, she always says like, I have 3 bells in my mouth. I do not tell a lie. And you're supposed to like make a sound with your mouth that sounds kind of like bells. And it's basically showing that like, I'm not hiding anything. Like everything I'm about to say is true, like whether or not it's true or not, you know, because the bell is supposed to like chase the untruth, chase the demons away. Anyway, sorry, I know we're out of time, but it was really fun. I did do it.
Yes. Well, okay. So we just have about a minute left. This has been great. Like, I'm like, there's so much more that we could have talked about. You guys have been awesome. Before we leave, just want to know, Jordan, we know that Redemptor is coming out this summer. But besides that, do you have a project that you're working on? And then also, Angeline, the way that the book ends, like, it seems like we could get another story. Will we get another story? Or are you working on something completely different? What are you doing? And and like, I don't know if they're going to cut us off or if we can keep going. So, Jordan, you want to go first?
Sure. I am working on something else. I'm working on multiple somethings else. I really like them. The main one I'm working on right now is actually contemporary fantasy, but I'm not going to say anything else about it because I know we don't have time.
Okay.
For me, if book 1 is Indigenous Nancy Drew, then book 2 is Indigenous Lara Croft. But instead of raiding tombs, the main character is reclaiming ancestral remains and sacred items from museums and bringing them back home. And in the course, one of her heists goes very badly.
Oh, that sounds, that sounds awesome. Okay, so we are officially out of time. This has been so much fun. Thank you for being here with us at the San Antonio Book Festival. Audience, we hope you've had a great time. time, don't forget to purchase your books from Nowhere Bookshop by clicking the Buy the Books button on their website. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.